My dad works in B2B marketing. He came by my school for career day and said he was a big ROAS man. Then he told everyone how much he loved calculating his return on ad spend. My friends still laugh at me to this day.
Not everyone gets B2B, but with LinkedIn, you'll be able to reach people who do. Get a $100 credit on your next ad campaign. Go to linkedin.com/results to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/results. Terms and conditions apply. LinkedIn, the place to be, to be.
We acknowledge the traditional owners of country throughout Australia and recognise their continuing connection to land, waters and culture. We pay our respects to their elders past, present and emerging. Welcome back to This Song Is Yours, a music podcast where we talk to a guest each week, talk about their life and creative endeavours, and talk to them about some of the music they love. I'm your host, Simon Fink, and welcome to episode 2. Today's guest is James Arneman from country folk duo Small Town Romance. This show works by chatting to our guests about music, but also getting them to make you a playlist. We upload it to Spotify for you to listen to, and you can find the link to our Spotify in the show notes. Our conversation today discusses Slim and I, a documentary on the life of Joy McKean and Slim Dusty. James and I also discuss Springsteen and Isolation Records. Here we go. Our guest today is one half of Australian country duo Small Town Romance. The band recently contributed a new song to the documentary Slim and I, which tells the beautiful story of partnership between Joy McKean and her husband, Slim Dusty. Joy and Slim also happen to be the grandparents of our guest today. Please welcome to the show, James Arneman.
G'day, Simon. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for being here. Now, as mentioned in the intro, you come from what I would refer to as the royal family of country music in Australia. What was it like growing up in such a musically inclined family?
Well, it was very exciting. It was fun. There was always music around, and there was lots of travelling. I have some wonderful memories just being out on tour from a very young age, and that rhythm of touring that my grandparents Slim and Joy had. That was the way they lived. They were kind of nomadic, and you'd travel, get to a small town, set up in the hall, play the show, speak to the people, have a bit of a wind down, go to bed, do it all again. And that sort of rhythm of life definitely imprinted on me at a young age, and I loved it. And it was so exciting. Every day was sort of leading up towards this sort of crescendo and this climax, which was the concert. So that was a lot of fun. That was probably one of my big memories of growing up in my family. And then the music itself as well, just the idea of songwriting and songwriting being a serious craft. I think as a young child, I became aware of that kind of early on, about crafting songs and what made a good song. Yeah. So it was a great way to grow up. Absolutely.
What are some of the earlier memories that you have with your grandfather?
So many. I think some of my favourites. I think when we'd be on tour, Slim, he'd been, by the time I came along, I was born in 1985. At that point, had a recording career that had lasted over 40 years at that point, and he was still going strong. And so watching him sort of backstage, just in his dressing room before he'd hit the stage each night, watching him sort of pump himself up and just see the absolute excitement and just the pure joy in what he did and how excited he got before every gig. And he'd warm up. I mean, he'd play a couple of songs to warm up with his guitar in his dressing room, and he'd stride around and sort of stretch. I loved just sitting there in the dressing room watching him get ready to go on. I just remember it just felt very intimate. He'd be warming up and singing a couple of songs, and you were the only audience there, and knowing that you were kind of getting a preview of the energy that he was about to sort of unleash on, a crowd of 1,000 or more people. Very special sort of moments like that. And I think, just generally the that sort of absolute enthusiasm. It was very infectious coming from my grandparents, both Slim and Joy. Even like around the dinner table, Slim would be making up rhymes at the dinner table. He was very playful with words, and then the way he would bounce off Joy, and Joy would be the more pragmatic sort of foil that would, kind of steer him towards, harnessing that energy, I guess, watching that happen in all the sort of family settings. He'd be coming up with something on the spot kind of as a bit of a throwaway line, and she'd be like, you should write that down or record that. And just watching them, their energies and the way they bounced off each other and complemented each other, that's wonderful memories.
With both Joy and Slim being quite musical, along with your mother Anne, who we'll talk about a bit later, was there ever a point where you thought maybe music isn't for me, or maybe I'll be a doctor or an architect?
I think, the last sort of 15 years of my life I've been working in film, so that's kind of been my career, and music has been, I've always wanted to play music, and there was no doubt that I'd always be playing music in some way. But there was never any pressure to follow in the footsteps or anything. And in some ways that was such an abstract idea to me anyway, because, Slim and Joy's career, it's such a specific, incredibly specific sort of phenomenon that took place, over the course of 50 years. They built this sort of grassroots following in Australia by going and playing shows in small towns and collecting songs and from people that they met, and collecting bits of verse and turning them into songs, and also writing. And it was just this sort of phenomenon that built and built over 50 years. So it was this huge legacy, I guess, that they built in this huge catalogue of music that it's kind of overwhelming when you contemplate it. So the idea of kind of following on from that was always a bit abstract to me. And I think growing up, I didn't grow up in the country. I grew up in suburban Sydney. So the idea of becoming a country singer, even though I was related to Slim Dusty and Joe McKean, becoming a country singer as a suburban kid in the 90s, it was always a bit of a strange disjunct there for me, I think. So I was always going to have music in my life. But to be honest, the most recent single that I've just put out with the group Small Town Romance, which is myself and my wife, Flora, that is the closest thing to following in the footsteps I've ever done, I think, and probably the first time I've ever done it, because everything I've done musically previous to that is quite separate, I think, and it's its own sort of musical path, I guess.
Just before, you mentioned that you've been working in film for the last number of years. Along with the band contributing to the film's soundtrack, you were also involved in the making of the film, like going through the archives and searching for old notes and footage. How did the project actually come about?
The project was something that was sort of gestating for a long time, because when I started working in film, I finished uni, finished film school, started working, and I was working in doco a lot, doing a lot of editing of docos. And so immediately I knew in the back of my head, well, I've got this access and there's this amazing story, and I'd love to do a definitive sort of doco about Slim and Joy. But the journey to getting that off the ground it took a little while. And so, that journey basically is that, and originally there's been films and TV sort of pieces, in the dozens about Slim and Joy. So it had been done, and there was a generation of Australians that really was familiar with Slim and Joy's story. So for me, it was a question of, why do we need to tell this story again, and what makes it have contemporary relevance, and how can we introduce a whole new audience to this music and this story? And so it took a while to sort of find a way to do that. Initially, the point where it clicked for me was when my grandmother Joy wrote her autobiography, and that was about 5 or 6 years ago, I think. Slim and Joy, they're like old school showbiz couple. And, in the 50s and 60s in showbiz, you had like your public persona, very squeaky clean, kind of all smiles. And then your private life was your private life, especially in country music in Australia. It's very kind of conservative values, I guess you'd say. So even when I started researching this, and interviewing my grandmother and saying, I'd like to make a film about your life with Slim. Can we, sit down and do some research interviews? I felt, even as a grandson, I was kind of getting the party line from Joy, because they'd done a million interviews before they trot out the sort of same dozen or so stories. And, you feel like when you've been telling a story over and over to interviewees and to the public for 40 years, you kind of forget what the original bit of truth was underneath it all, and you've kind of just built this sort of public persona. So I wanted to sort of break that down and get back to kind of dig a bit deeper. And when Joy decided to write her autobiography, she immediately was just like going straight back to sort of primary archives, like her diaries, ringing up her friends, going through old ephemera, and immediately that sort of reactivated a whole lot of old memory pathways for her. And she sent me a few drafts of the opening chapters to the book, and immediately I just knew, well, this is it. This is, it's been a bit of a wait, but this is the way into this story, because telling the story of their partnership through Joy's perspective and using this sort of fresh take that Joy has from revisiting all of this, that's the way in. But of course, making a film about Slim, you've obviously got to get the record company on side, and it's a huge amount of intellectual property there that's very valuable to them. So they want to kind of, be involved in the process and approve of the way you're doing it. And every time we tried to pitch it, people generally wanted Slim to be the focus of the film. So it was hard to get that idea of Joy being kind of the centerpiece of the film into the pitch and for it to stick through various iterations. And so we found it difficult to fund the film with Joy as the central figure, because Slim was so much more recognizable. People wanted that, in terms of the producers and the record company wanted that. But when you actually pitch that to funding bodies and financing people, they said, well, what's new about this? We know Slim's story. So it was kind of a bit of a circle we went through. But then kind of attitudes changed almost, overnight, it felt like, in an approach to telling women's stories in film and in all walks of life, in around, 2016, I guess it was. And from there, immediately that pitch became much more sellable, and we were able to make the film on the scale we wanted to make it with a big distributor. We were able to get a big director in, Creve Stenders, to come and direct the film. And so I had all this research done. I had all the archival material ready to go. I had all the interviewees that are prepped. We were just ready to run with it. So the moment that sort of the timing became right, we had everything ready to go, and we just pushed on through and made the film. And we're really happy with what we made.
That's beautiful. With the time that we're currently living in, people do want to hear different stories. The narrative used to be behind every great man is a great woman, but I think that in 2020, we're wanting stories from these different perspectives. The movie itself does focus on the partnership of Joy and Slim and them working side by side and both of them playing to their own strengths. Do you think that this was because of the time that we're in that it allowed for this perspective to be told?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Like even as, recently as 2012, 2013, when we were pitching this, there wasn't that interest in telling the story this way. And then suddenly it happened very quickly. So there was this interest in, it's not necessarily revisionist history in any real way. It's just looking at this story through a different lens, and the lens of Joy. And the phenomenon of Slim Dusty is just inconceivable without Joy. And that's the sort of, that's not to diminish any of Slim's achievements. He was, his ability to, his charisma, his strength of performance, his vocal abilities, his writing abilities, he was the public facing part of the partnership. But the managing, the songwriting, the tour booking, keeping the family together through all thick and thin, the business management, that was all Joy, very much. So that's what we wanted to show in this film, that, at its core, it was a real family story of just how a family was able to kind of stay together amidst all the ups and downs of a career in music. And the backdrop was 50 years of Australian history that they were writing songs about at the same time. And through that 50 years of history, you see the songs are reflecting the values of a changing Australia, and you see a sort of a changing rural Australia as this family changes.
When you were doing some of the research for the film, you came across some of the earlier lyrics that then became the song that Small Town Romance contributed to the film called I Don't Believe You. When you stumble across something like that, how does your brain recognise that this could be a song? And then, I guess, how do you approach one of Australia's most loved country singers and say, let's co-write or let's finish this song together?
Yeah, I guess on its surface, it's pure nepotism, but look, it was just a product of what we were doing with the film was taking quite a candid approach to retelling their story. And when I came across some demos on a tape that Joy had done around the time Slim passed away, this song, this short little demo that she'd done, it was like, half a song. It just struck me that it was incredibly candid, incredibly raw for Joy. Joy is a songwriter that has written for, predominantly she wrote for Slim. She wrote for Slim's voice. She wrote in his character. She knew what worked for him. But she also wrote for herself, and she wrote songs over the years about, various things. But this song in particular that I'd found was, it was a new sort of, it was new territory. I'd never heard a song this honest and this raw from Joy before, and it just fitted perfectly with what was going on in the film, and the sort of confessional, but also quite measured and beautiful sort of delivery that she has in the film when she's talking about her life. So it made sense. Initially, the idea was, did she want to finish writing it, and then we could think about how to incorporate it into the film. But Joy was the one that threw it out there and said, look, this is one where I sort of hit a wall with this. Would you like to, try finishing off for me? And for Small Town Romance, Flora and I, our band, we kind of, it wasn't necessarily in our wheelhouse, I think, because Joy's got a very classic 1950s style of songwriting, She kind of, her songwriting DNA kind of traces back to when she was a teenager, and country music was in its halcyon days, and it's this classic sort of country, almost kind of old-timey sensibility to her melodies. So I tasked my wife Flora with the co-write, because her sensibility matched it a lot better than mine, and she did all the work, to be honest. She started an email chain back and forth with Joy and sent demos back and forth. And I mean, Joy doesn't co-write, full stop. She just never does. Anything that says it's a co-write in her catalogue between her and Slim, usually it's one of them or the other that's written it, and they just said it was a co-write. But she just doesn't co-write. And I can understand why now, because she's got very specific ideas about melody in particular that she's not willing to compromise on. And so writing this was a challenge, because she had really specific ideas. And, we are less kind of country music purists, I guess you'd say. Flora and I, it's kind of a pretty broad church, the sorts of influences we pull in. But this song, I think she wanted to keep it pretty close to that initial vision she had. So Flora was great. She kind of just did a bit of arranging and nips and tucks, and she came up with some beautiful lines that worked perfectly side by side with Joy's lines. And I think the most memorable thing was that we got an email back from her at one point about the outro of the song, and we were trying a few different things and we couldn't figure out a way to end it. And Joy said, it needs to be angrier. It needs to be really angry. And that was kind of a bit of an affront. We thought it was this nice sort of plotty, and we, we wanted it to be a pretty song, but she wanted that message, that lyric at the end, to be quite angry, I think, and quite unrelenting. And that was a challenge, but Flora came up with those final lines, and I think, and to our, luckily, Joy loved it. She said, that's perfect. I love it. That was the one thing that she really, really kind of came back with a huge amount of enthusiasm, and that was the ending that Flora came up with. So that's how it happened. It was kind of a back and forth over a number of months, and then we got the approval from Joy, and we went to record it just before the pandemic hit.
My dad works in B2B marketing. He came by my school for career day and said he was a big ROAS man. Then he told everyone how much he loved calculating his return on ad spend. My friends still laugh at me to this day.
Not everyone gets B2B, but with LinkedIn, you'll be able to reach people who do. Get a $100 credit on your next ad campaign. Go to linkedin.com/results to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/results. Terms and conditions apply. LinkedIn, the place to be, to be.
Hey, I'm Ryan Reynolds. Recently, I asked Mint Mobile's legal team if big wireless companies are allowed to raise prices due to inflation. They said yes. And then when I asked if raising prices technically violates those onerous 2-year contracts, they said, "What the f*** are you talking about, you insane Hollywood ass f- So to recap, we're cutting the price of Mint Unlimited from $30 a month to just $15 a month. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 upfront payment equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes. See details.
In the email chain you mentioned, I did hear that Joy, she didn't pull any punches. Can you explain to us the faux yodel?
Oh, yes. So Joy was in a sister act, her sister Heather. They sang together as teenagers in Sydney, and they were called the Yodeling McKean Sisters. So this is in like the heyday of yodeling, when yodeling was like a key part of country music. And they used to yodel in harmony, and it's like vocal acrobatics essentially, but it was very, very popular at the time, and they were one of the best in Australia at it. And so in more recent times, there's the odd bit of yodeling that happens in country music. You know, there's like, and I think Flora and I have come to call it kind of faux yodeling. You know, like Gillian Welsh kind of, you know, mid-tempo sort of. You know, it's not a real commitment to the. You know, it's not like, you know, Swiss Alpine yodeling. It's like it's pretty lax. So we put a bit of a faux yodel in the turnaround to this song, just because in the demo we didn't have you know, a color instrument at hand. So we said, oh, let's just do a yodel. But we got like an email back about 5 minutes later saying, what's all this faux yodeling about? Just get rid of it. Get rid of it. So that got canned immediately. Yeah. So yeah, she has very specific ideas about what she wants, Joy, and she doesn't want to compromise on them. I mean, there's lots of stories about her writing songs for Slim, and Slim saying, I can't sing that. It's too many words, or that melody's not right for me. And she's like, no, we're going to sit down and we're going to work through it. And this is the way you're going to sing the melody. You're not going to, you know, simplify it or flatten it out. And the best example of that is Slim's biggest hit, Lights on the Hill, was a song that he just dismissed out of hand when she gave it to him initially and said, there's too many words in this song. I can't get my breath. I can't sing this rhythm. And she said, yes, you can. You know, just work on it. And, you know, the rest is history. That song is his biggest hit and sort of the crowning jewel in their catalogue.
The single was co-written with your grandma Joy and your wife Flora, but it also features Anne Kirkpatrick on vocals. Now, Anne, in her own right, is an ARIA Award winner and a country music star, but she's also your mother. It is quite rare to have 3 generations of family on a track. Was that a special kind of experience for you?
Yeah, absolutely. That was the idea behind the whole single, I think, was to get us all together on one track in some way, if we could. Because this song, you know, sonically and melodically, it's not our usual wheelhouse for small town romance, but we wanted to do something that was in line with the tone of the film and that could get the whole family on board. And Mum has a voice that is very distinct, and for me, it's really, her voice has aged incredibly well, and she's got such a distinctive sort of timbre to her voice and such a lived-in quality that I love, that she was the perfect person to sing this song, really. So yeah, it was a lot of fun. She came down to Melbourne and we tracked it, and yeah, and just, you know, just harmony singing with Mum is something I love doing. It just feels very natural, you know, comes easy.
When you get together at a family event, do the guitars come out after a few glasses of wine or a few beers?
Yes and no. I think when I was growing up, because it was, I mean, these days, because we're not gigging as much, I think, yes, we definitely do like to get the guitars out and have a sing and work up some material, and we have a lot of fun with that. I think when I was growing up, because music was work and, you know, you'd be playing a gig that night anyway, it was funny how social situations didn't have as much music around as you would think, because it was work. So, you know, we've finished work, let's put the guitars away. But definitely in more recent years, in the last 10, 15 years, it's definitely come back, and we have great times sort of just dusting off old bits and pieces from the family catalogue, or just from, you know, old Australian country songs, things like that, that really, you know, are great to revisit together.
You and your wife, Flora, make up the band Small Town Romance. How did the band come about? Was it that you were in a couple and then realised you could make it work as a band, or was it more of a band that then turned into a romantic partnership?
We were a couple first, although we met each other through going to each other's gigs. So I think I first met Flora when I saw her playing in a folk duo, and they were fantastic. And I was quite taken with her. And then she came and saw me play the next week, and I was in like a terrible bluegrass duo, sort of trying to sound like the Louvin Brothers, but failing miserably. And and we, we had a sort of shared love of songwriting and playing country and roots music. So but we were together for a couple of years, and then our friend Gemma just booked a gig and told us, start a band. This is the first gig you've got. Just booked a gig for us. And so we had to find a band in like a week and come up with a repertoire. So thanks to Gemma Rollins, because she actually forced us into starting a band. And then, look, to be honest, we just had a lot of fun just being in a band, playing tunes around town in Melbourne, because there's lots of great venues and places to play. So we had a great kind of couple of years just being a local sort of bar band and playing all our favourite music and a few originals. And then we put out a debut record in 2016, and then we kind of took it a bit more seriously for that couple of years after that. And and we had some great results. We got some Golden Guitar nominations and Music Victoria nominations. So we were really happy. And then just around, now that sort of we had a bit of time off because we had a baby, and then also we made the film, so that took a couple of years, and now we're sort of in the midst of recording a new record right now, which hopefully we'll have a single out by the end of the year.
Oh, awesome. I was going to ask if there was a second record on the way.
Oh, yeah, there's a second and a third that are written and ready to go. We're doing a lockdown acoustic record. So being locked down is we're about to go into the studio the weekend that lockdown happened to make our second record. And so we said, all right, well, we'll put those songs aside because that's our band record. That's like our Saturday night Doug Psalm party record. And then because all we did during lockdown was listen to like the most depressing music imaginable whilst in lockdown for some reason. We just gone back to like really grim acoustic music. But we kind of just got back to basics during lockdown because that's all we could do. Harmony singing, close harmony singing, really spare arrangements, taking songs we'd written and really melting them back to their essence. And then we've recorded them at home, got a few other players overdubbing on them, but they're pretty spare arrangements. And we're super happy with how it's come up. We just really think we've it's kind of a beautiful document of us sort of getting back to basics. So that's the first record that'll come out, and then next year we'll put out a band record. We'll get back to our Saturday night sort of Lucinda Williams, Doug Psalm record.
I did want to quickly touch on another one of your isolation projects, Trapped.
Yes,
the
Trapped.
Bruce Springsteen podcast,
good.
Trapped.
Excellent. I'm glad there's getting a plug. Yes, we need to. Yes, like everyone lockdown, we immediately thought, well, everyone needs to hear our thoughts. And so, Flora and I would have sat on our porch and debated about Bruce Springsteen's discography anyway, but we decided, we might as well record it. So Trapped is a Bruce Springsteen coronavirus chronicle, and it is us going album by album through Bruce Springsteen's discography. So Bruce's discography, he's kind of like the glue in our relationship, I guess. The very first conversation we ever had was about Bruce Springsteen. That's when we hit it off. So he's just a fundamental part of our lives, I guess. And so in times of lockdown, everyone went back to their safe music. I was hearing people talk about this, how they're looking at Spotify and what was kind of getting a lot of spins when the pandemic started. And it was all that classic sort of safe music of the past, like your Neil Youngs and your, easy listening stuff. Everyone was going back to safe music. People weren't that interested in brand new music. So we were the same. We went back and started listening to some Bruce again. And it's a lot of fun just to, debate. We've got lots of different opinions. It's a great catalogue. Bruce Springsteen's got such a far-ranging catalogue, and more than any other of his contemporaries, like your Neil Youngs or your Bob Dylans, it feels like he was making more consistently relevant music for a longer period. Like he stayed consistently quite popular and relevant in a way that maybe the others haven't. I mean, that's debatable, but we think so. And so
I'd agree with that, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Bob Dylan still makes good records, but I don't think he's thought of as relevant, whereas when Bruce Springsteen made The Rising, after 9/11, that was an incredibly resonant record around the world. We've had a lot of fun. We've done 3 episodes, we've recorded a 4th, and we're back into it. We had a bit of a hiatus while we made our acoustic record, and now we're finished that, so we're back into the podcasting. So look it up on all your various, wherever you find your podcasts. Trapped, a Bruce Springsteen Coronavirus Chronicle.
We'll definitely give it a plug at the end of the show. For you, what is the ultimate Springsteen record?
Oh, that's a tough one. Yeah, this is why we did it, because, the discography is quite, I mean, he essentially rewrites the same 3 or 4 songs over and over and over again, which is great. Like, there's nothing wrong with doing that. Like, that's a great idea, and that's just honing your craft. And, once you've got, when you're drawing on those essential archetypes and ideas that he is, you can rewrite them and reinvent them throughout the course of a 50-year career. But for me, probably it's the predictable answer that Born to Run is the one that I can go back to, that gets me to a state of emotion more deeply than any other record. It's just the sense of wonder and excitement of youth, but also tinged with the sadness of that, the broken promise of being young and eventually sort of aging out. And then the next record, Darkness on the Edge of Town, is kind of like exploring that broken promise and that sort of becoming an adult and the compromises of adulthood sort of impinging on you. So it's that 1-2, the 1-2 of Born to Run and Darkness on the Edge of Town are probably the high point for me in his catalogue, but Born to Run edges out Darkness as number 1.
I think that's very fair. I think for myself, Nebraska does take that number 1 spot, but I think Born to Run is a classic for a reason. It makes sense.
Yeah, I think that Nebraska is definitely a gateway drug for Bruce Springsteen. I think a lot of singer-songwriters, it's their way in, because just the bombast of Bruce Springsteen and the sort of dad rock elements of it, they can kind of put people off initially. But Nebraska, because it's quite stark and has this sense of like authenticity and groundedness, it kind of draws you into the Bruce sensibility in a way, and then you can kind of access the rest of the catalogue after that. So Nebraska definitely, it's an honourable mention for me, yeah.
Are you happy to talk about your playlist?
Yeah, let's do it.
It goes without saying that there would be at least one Slim Dusty song on the playlist. Now, Slim had over 100 studio records and over 1,000 songs. What was it about Indian Pacific that you thought, yep, this is the one for the playlist?
Yeah, it's a tough one to pick one song out of, over 1,000. I think this song for me really distills the Slim and Joy partnership. So it's written by my grandmother Joy for Slim, and I think it's 1976 she writes this. So this is kind of the height of his fame and his success. And it's a song, it's a very simple conceit for a song. It's the train that runs from the east to the west of Australia, the Indian Pacific. It's basically a song telling the story of looking out the window as you cross the nation. So it's incredibly cinematic in its imagery, and it's it's incredibly grandiose in its production too. It's got a ridiculous string section on it, which is like pretty over the top. It's got this great guitar lick in it. It's a lot of different elements. It's quite rocky. It's a whole lot of elements that are coming together to create sort of something that's greater than the sum of its parts. I think this song, it's like a real widescreen cinematic song, and it's just beautifully written. And within the space of a couple of verses, you're taken from one side of the country to the other, and Joy does it effortlessly with the imagery. The imagery is just so rich, and the turns of phrase are so sort of, the syllables are amazing. That's what we always say, good syllables. Songs got good syllables.
Some of the other songs you picked on the playlist include Wilco and Marlon Williams, which I'd classify as more modern day folk or Americana.
Yeah.
What is it about these acts that you love?
Well, I think, starting with Wilco, I think Jeff Tweedy is someone that obviously is very aware of the rudiments of songwriting in its classic form. You know, what Woody Guthrie was doing, what folk singers were doing, what country singers were doing in their craft. And he, for me, at a certain point, gets quite experimental, I guess. He goes off on more an experimental avant-garde bent, and his writing is quite abstract and not as literal, whereas, you know, country music and roots music tends to have quite a literal, grounded feeling to it. But Jeff Tweedy definitely works on more of an emotive, abstract level, I think, that sets him apart. But he tends to use instrumentation and melodies that are very evocative of old Americana and classic American music, I guess. So, and I think he revels in that tension as well between those classic melodies and elements and more modern production. And that tension is such a key part of their music. And his voice has a fragility to it that kind of represents that tension, that it's sort of barely holding together, and that sense of sort of American identity that's kind of hanging by a thread, you know, sense of the old and the new sort of being at odds. I love that about his songwriting. Marlon Williams is someone that was just captivating to watch. He turned up in Melbourne a few years back and just immediately everyone knew, like, wow. And it only took about 6 months and he was gone out of the pubs and into stardom. He was just, you know, next level. He could sing anything. He was in the classic mold of like an amazing singer that could sing anything, you know, Sinatra or Chris Isaak, all this stuff. Like he can sing like that. But what he does on his second record is he doesn't oversing anything. And it's just like, it's a masterclass in not getting carried away with, well, I can sing really loud and belt this, maybe I will. It's just, it's an absolute lesson in less is more and holding back and just using his vocals so effectively. And then the production on it, again, he writes quite classic sounding songs, and there's a very classic Roy Orbison sort of sound to his vocal, drenched in reverb and that full-on sort of delivery he has. But the production gives it a very sort of futuristic. That's a pretty lame word. No one's used that word for a while. Futuristic. But it does. It feels like it's almost like a retro. It's like the idea of the future in the 70s sound to that record that I just love. And I just think the simplicity of it and he didn't overcook it. You know, so many people overcook their second record. He just got it right. He just got it just right. So I love that record.
It's a great record in terms of, well, as you said, it's a lesson in restraint in doing things well. Yeah,
totally.
The last song I wanted to discuss today was High Open Hills, which is a beautiful track from Melbourne artist Liz Stringer. What is it about this song that connects to you?
Liz is just, you know, has a sort of conviction that you hope for in a singer-songwriter, in an artist in general. She just is 100 million% conviction in whatever she does, and it's incredibly moving to watch her play, whether it be in the corner of a pub or at Port Fairy in front of 2,000 people. She just got that ability to connect emotionally, and this song is it's a real weeper, but it's just a beautiful, beautiful song. And Liz just reminds me as well of a time when I first moved to Melbourne and just discovered a whole lot of singer-songwriters that I didn't know existed, that were kind of more local Victorian songwriters at the time, that are all just blew me away with how good they were. Van Walker, Chris Altman, you know, the list goes on. There's so many of them. You know, Geordie Lane, so many great songwriters, and she was part of that sort of group. And she's continued to just power, and she's got a huge voice. And yeah, she just gets me to a state of emotion, you know, within a chorus that not many singers can do, you know. So I continue to spin those records.
I think it's a sign of a good songwriter when you can kind of, even within just the course of a chorus or a verse, just make someone feel something within that short space. That's the job description, you know? Yeah. James, look, thank you very much for your time today. I do really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Simon. Cheers.
So that's our show. Thank you to James Arneman and Small Town Romance for joining us on the show. Slim and I is out now at cinemas around the country, and you can find the soundtrack streaming on all major music platforms. James and Flora's podcast, Trapped, the Bruce Springsteen Coronavirus Chronicles, is available wherever you get your pods, so don't forget to subscribe to their show. Speaking of subscribing, if you like this show, please do so wherever you get your pods and stay up to date when new episodes are released. We release new shows each Thursday morning with guest playlists streaming on Spotify at the same time. Once you've finished listening to this episode, head over to Spotify to listen to some of the songs that James has picked. Follow the playlist profile on Spotify, and you can follow us on Instagram and Facebook. Until next week, cheers.